So Ahriman is a Chaos Space Marine of the Thousand Suns Space Marine Legion, and the greatest sorcerer to have ever been produced by the Thousand Suns. He is a Terran Marine that rose through the ranks of his legion to become the first captain, the chief librarian, and the preeminent master of one of their psychic disciplines, precognition. But before we get to all that, let's learn about his origins. Ahzek Ahriman was born on Terra, among the wealthy tribes of the Archimedean Empire, whose kings had allied with the Emperor during the Unification Wars. Because of this alliance, Ahriman's tribes were largely spared the horrors of the Atomic Wars and Proto-Astartes invasions. Following the Emperor's victory in Terra's alliance with Mars, Ahriman and his twin brother, Ormuzd, were selected to be inducted into the ranks of the Legion Astartes. Ahriman brothers traveled to the stars alongside the Emperor and his legions as part of the Great Crusade, but 5 years into the expedition, the Thousand Suns Legion began manifesting psychic abilities, and with these manifestations began the terrible curse known as the Flesh Change. Over time, the problem became so severe that many people thought that the Imperium should suggest that the Thousand Suns be disbanded. However, when the Crusade reached Magnus upon Prospero, the Primarch of the Thousand Suns was seemingly able to eradicate the threat of the Flesh Change, although only a fraction of the affected Marines survived the mysterious process. One of those who perished, unfortunately, was Ormuzd Ahriman, whose passing instilled in his twin brother both great grief and great dread of the Flesh Change. In remembrance of his brother, Ahzek had Ormuzd pendant, the twin of his own, both gifts from their mothers, worked into the shoulder guard of his armor. Ahriman rose to the position of chief librarian of the Legion, and then captain of the First Fellowship, which he became commander of the elite Sekhmet, and leader of the Legion's most powerful cult, the Corvidae, all at the same time. Despite this impressive record, little is currently known of the bulk of Ahriman's career as a legionary. The earliest mention of him is a note of his 5 years during the World Bearers Legion, where he found himself uncomfortable with their expressions in the belief of the Emperor's divinity. Despite this period where he was unhappy, Ahriman did consider that he had become friends with the Word Bearer's Astarte named Erebus. He is also on record as being in favor of the assignment of the Remembrancers to the Crusade forces, believing the documenting of his legion as one in a way in which the wider body of the Imperium could learn to understand, and therefore no longer fear the Psyker. The earliest detailed mention of Ahriman in historical records currently is during the Argu campaign, a compliance action carried out by the Thousand Suns on the 20th expedition towards the close of the 2nd century of the Great Crusade. During this campaign, Ahriman is noted to have risked his Primarch's displeasure by leading a search team for him after Magnus made himself absent from the Legion, despite Magnus's prior insistence that he was not to be disturbed. This is the first time that he is known to have both mistrusted the judgment of his Primarch and also ignored his wishes. Towards the end of the campaign, when a contingent of Space Wolves arrived to convey a message to Magnus from Leman Russ, Ahriman found himself falling into an association with the Space Wolf's rune priest, Othir Wormdrake, during which he shared information on the Thousand Suns' psychic disciplines in what he thought was a meeting of like-minded individuals, but would later prove treacherous. His perceived fledgling kinship with the rune priest proved helpful. However, when both the Space Wolves and the Thousand Suns were forced to engage in combat with the Xenos weapon forms and hostile Desitans of the Warp before leaving Argu. Around this time, Ahriman was charged with inducting the Remembrancer Lemuel Gauman into the ways of the Thousand Suns by Magnus the Red, in an overt attempt to develop Gauman's own psychic abilities and help spread understanding of Magnus's philosophies. Ahriman took Gauman on his probationer and spent a significant amount of time illuminating and training the Remembrancer throughout the period leading up to the burning of Prospero. This training including taking Gauman among combat missions during the pacification of Helosia, where Ahriman was present for the return of the Flesh Change in his legion and the execution of those afflicted. The return of this flesh change to the Thousand Sons after Magnus had previously promised that he had banished this danger forever had a deep impact on Ahriman. His feelings of dread at the possibility of mutation and hurt betrayal caused by his Primarch's inability to protect the Legion being so strong that Gauman was able to detect them. Ahriman is next recorded being present at two of the most important historical events of this time period, the triumph of Ulanor, at which Horus was made War Master, and during the Council of Nicaea, at which the Emperor outlawed the use of psychic powers within the Legion Astartes. To Ahriman, the Council of Nicaea felt more like a trial of the Thousand Sons, and his sense of angry betrayal and disillusion at the turn of events was made all the more keen by the fact that the first person to step forth and accuse the Thousand Sons of malign practices was his supposed ally and colleague, Othir Wormdrake. Ahriman is next spoken of in another strained meeting with his Primarch, as Magnus unveiled his own discernment, that of the oncoming fall upon Davin. Ahriman, along with the other senior figures of the Thousand Sons, was enlisted in aiding Magnus in his attempt to psychically protect Horus. In the aftermath of this subsequent failure, Magnus explained to Ahriman that he had been thwarted by agents of something he did not know or understand, called the Primordial Annihilator. However, Ahriman once again realized that his Primarch was lying to him, and that Magnus not only knew of this Annihilator, this chaos, he had dealt with it before. Rocked by these uncertain events and desperate to learn of the future, Ahriman authorized the supercharging of the precognition power of the Remembrancer Callista Eris, attached to the Thousand Sons. While she was able to deliver a prophecy to Ahriman's waiting ears, she also died, literally burnt out in the process. Ahriman's sanction of the death of an innocent prompted Lemuel Gauman to turn his back upon his mentor, ending both his training and their friendship. Magnus similarly cast about for direction at this time, and similarly made a questionable moral choice. He decided to use sorcerous techniques to attempt to contact the Emperor directly and communicate to him the news of Horus's betrayal and the machinations of chaos. Ahriman was selected to help him enact this spell, thus learning of the existence of demons, and to guard Magnus's mortal body during the process. Again, in the aftermath of failure, Ahriman discerned that Magnus was keeping knowledge from him and the Legion, this time learning not only the truth behind the cessation of the flesh change, Magnus striking a sorcerer's deal with the power of the warp to save his children, but also why he and the other Corvidae had been unable to predict an incoming retributive attack on Prospero. Magnus, in his grief and shame, had prevented it. Finally, at the great breaking point with his Primarch, Ahriman angrily refused to follow Magnus's order to stand down and await punishment. Instead, he declared, "We are the Red Sorcerers of Prospero, damned in the eyes of our fellows, and this is how our story ends. In betrayal and bloodshed? No, you may find it nobler to suffer your fate, but I will take arms against it." And with that declaration, the chief librarian of the Legion turned the Thousand Sons away from Magnus's design and led them in a desperate defense of their homeworld in the doomed battle that would come to be known as the Burning of Prospero. Though he knew much knowledge would be lost or destroyed during this battle, Ahriman vowed to restore all of it, no matter the cost. Recognizing that, despite all their powers and strategies, there was only one person on Prospero who could decisively alter the fate of the Thousand Sons. Ahriman regularly implored Magnus to come to his son's aid during this battle. However, Magnus did not. Sensing Othir Wormdrake's presence in the approaching horde of space wolves, Ahriman made psychic contact with him, dragging him into the etheric plane to confront him there. The two psychers dueled for a time before Ahriman eventually gained the upper hand, using the opportunity to link minds with Wormdrake and dump the truth of the matter into the consciousness of the space wolf. Wormdrake learned it all: Horus's betrayal, the setting up of the Thousand Sons, and the space wolf's mistakes that led them to this point. Returning both himself and the day's Wormdrake to the mundane dimension, but still keeping their minds free of their bodies, Ahriman paused to look around the battlefield, witnessing Leman Russ kill Thousand Sons by the scores, and Space Wolf's mindless destruction of all that he cared about. in a moment's reflection upon vengeance, instead of releasing Wormdrake, and therefore potentially allowing the Rune Priest to spread his newly acquired knowledge of the truth. Ahriman spitefully cast Wormdrake's soul to the waiting void predators of the warp. Returning to his material body, Ahriman chose to accept the consequences of his action, believing his own imminent death and that of his legion was now all but inevitable. This belief was proved false, however, when Magnus the Red finally chose to enter the fray, entering in a duel with Leman Russ that stilled the battlefield, allowing Ahriman to pull the remaining 1,000 Suns back to the Great Pyramid of Tizca. There he learned that Magnus, while unsure of his own fate, had foreseen that Ahriman would survive this day, and so had to bequeath him to the Book of Magnus, the Primarch's own tome of collected knowledge and incalculable sorcerous power. In psychic communication with him, even as he fought the Wolf King, Magnus instructed Ahriman to do one last thing for him, and to receive one last gift. As Magnus fell, he transmitted a huge burst of his own etheric power into Ahriman, using the Chief Librarian as a psychic and sorcerous conduit to all the surviving legionaries. Used as a vessel for Magnus's great spell, Ahzek Ahriman and all the other 1,000 Suns vanished from Prospero. Having been transported through the raw warp itself, Ahriman found himself awakening upon a world that would later be called the Planet of Sorcerers, where he was reunited with the survivors of his legion, and now transformed into a being of etheric energy, Magnus the Red himself. Ahriman's next actions and the details of his participation in the Horus Heresy are not currently known, but what is recorded is that his decision to enact his own, now infamous, master spell. Witnessing the survivors of his legion continue to suffer the flesh change, Ahriman determined to free himself and his brethren from this threat. He took the Book of Magnus and enlisted the aid of a cabal of senior surviving members of the Legion, including Hathor Mat, Ammon, and Sobek. Ahriman conceived a spell that aimed to permanently rid the 1,000 Suns of this curse, called the Flesh Change. The result of the spell, called the Rubric of Ahriman, while imperfect, satisfied Ahriman in its consequence. It turned all the warriors without psychic abilities into mindless automata, and greatly amplified the abilities of all those who had more than a spark. Magnus was not like of mind, however. So great was his wrath that when the Cabal was discovered that the Primarch threatened to obliterate them utterly, but the very patron who had worked the mutations upon them in the first place intervened. Who can say what the most enigmatic and capricious of entities intended? In any event, the Demon Prince Magnus stayed his hand, instead banishing Ahriman and his Cabal from the planet of Sorceress, and condemning them to wander the Eye of Terror and beyond in a hopeless quest to understand chaos and the god Zeech. As Ahriman was exiled, so too was his Cabal, but Aemon was determined to find all the secrets of the Rubric and perhaps restore some of his mindless brothers back to life. Over the next 1,000 standard years, as he continued to amass more power, he founded his own powerful warband, known as the Brotherhood of Dust, which consisted of many of the exiled 1,000 Suns. He also gathered void ships and other Chaos Space Marines, hundreds of Rubricae, and a number of apprentices who themselves became formidable Chaos Sorcerers in their own right. It was Aemon's intent to see the suffering of his legion ended, for he would undo the fell magic of the Rubric that has doomed his former battle brothers to their unlife, so that he could release their tortured souls. Yet, despite all this grand scheme and designs, he still needed the wayward Ahriman, for only he possessed the necessary knowledge of the Rubric. Aemon sent out emissaries all over the galaxy, chasing up rumors no matter how minor, or the possible whereabouts of the former 1,000 Sun Chief Librarian. During this quest, Aemon came across other former members of the 1,000 Suns. He sent these emissaries to his former battle brothers in the hopes of enticing them to join his warband. If they accepted, they would become part of the Brotherhood of Dust. However, those that refused faced the prospect of annihilation, both themselves and those that followed them. In the meantime, Ahriman had been hiding amongst a renegade warband dedicated to Khorne, known as the Harrowing. Somehow, the Brotherhood of Dust managed to track the psychic spore of Ahriman to this warband. Aemon sent an emissary named Tolbek, a former 1,000 Sun legionnaire and member of Ahriman's Cabal. An adept of the Pyre cult in the long-broken traditions of Prospero, Tolbek had been the one to first join Ahriman's Cabal. Tolbek played his part in the rubric that destroyed their legions and shared in their banishment. Tolbek, which was escorted by a pair of rubric marines, went over to the warband's vessel, the Blood Crescent, to entreat with the warband's leader, Gzhel. During their subsequent audience aboard the harrowing ship, Tolbek devised the true identity of Ahriman, who had been masquerading as a lowly sorceress initiate named Horkos, who looked upon with contempt by his fellow renegades as the lowest of the low and an oathbreaker. Recognizing Tolbek and realizing his identity had been compromised, Ahriman unleashed his suppressed sorcerer's abilities, both against his allies and the Thousand Sun sorcerer. After killing the majority of the harrowing's leaders, Ahriman was confronted by Tolbek. He telepathically invaded Tolbek's mind, attempting to devise why he had been sought out, but the cunning sorcerer emulated his own mind, attempting to pull Ahriman's psychically linked mind into oblivion with him. Ahriman just barely managed to escape Tolbek's insidious trap, and Tolbek died as his body erupted into flames, emulating his physical self into a pile of ash. After this, Ahriman had no choice but to flee into the warp. During his quest to determine who had sought him out, Aemon sent numerous minions to do his biddings, including warp creatures and half-demon princes, all of which failed to kill Ahriman. Despite Aemon's best efforts, Ahriman managed to discover his former brother's location and infiltrated his fleet. Unfortunately, before Ahriman could launch a surprise assault on Aemon, he was betrayed by the mistress of the ship he had stolen, his location compromised. Ahriman managed to emerge victorious after battling against 3 of Aemon's Chaos Sorcerers, but he was badly wounded during the fight. Aemon eventually appeared in person and subdued the wounded Ahriman with powerful wards of binding and hexes, and brought him aboard the flagship, the Sai Korax. While imprisoned, Aemon convinced Ahriman to give him the invaluable information he desired so that he could undo the rubric, and Ahriman finally had no choice but to give in. Luckily, Ahriman's allies came to the rescue and they managed to effect his escape. But the former librarian was soon confronted by the angry Aemon, who unleashed a powerful psychic attack. During the ensuing duel, Ahriman revealed the final secret of the rubric to his former brother. It was all part of the Thousand Suns, bound into their very beings. The rubric ran through them all, linking them, sustaining them. Its power was in Ahriman's hands. Unable to pull his mind away from Ahriman, the Chaos Sorcerer caused Aemon to spontaneously combust from the powerful psychic energy unleashed from this arcane spell. Aemon's armor came apart, each component pulling away from the other, splitting gray dust into the turning wind. This vortex of power enveloped Ahriman and lifted him high into the air, the separate pieces of Aemon's armor aligning itself over his unarmored splayed body. Then, one plate at a time, they slid in over place over Ahriman's flesh. Finally, Aemon's horned helm slipped over Ahriman's skull. The mind of the living sorcerers of the Brotherhood of Dust teetered on the edge of indecision. The dead Rubrique simply waited. Raising his hands, Ahriman summoned magical flames from the floor, which engulfed the red lacquer from the armor of every Rubrique and sorcerer. Then the flames flickered blue, and the silver armor became polished sapphire. Ahriman looked across the ranks of blue armor. Slowly he knelt and bowed his head. He assumed the mantle of leadership of the Brotherhood of Dust, including its massive fleet and army of followers. It is not known if the Brotherhood of Dust is the same warband, now known as the Prodigal Sons, that Ahriman currently leads into the late 41st millennium. Among Ahriman's countless atrocities, there are those that stand as true testaments to his power and ruthlessness. One such incident is known as the Harvest of Calliope. Calliope was a world of lost knowledge, an entire planet given over to the arcing of records from the earliest days of the Imperium all the way to its uncertain present. Stacks of rotting parchment filled caverns extending far beneath its crust. Data spools stationed reigned its orbits from pole to pole, and its cities sprawled around the index vaults. Every soul on Calliope existed to the service of the archive, from the hunters who stalked vermin in the deep parchments of stacks, to the scribes who fought for control over the hundreds of contradictory indexes. All were bound to the ecology of the archive. So it had been for a time since before any could remember, and so it seemed things would continue, until change happened. A faction arose within the caste of indexers. This faction called for the unification of all the indexes into an endless extending formula. They called themselves the Summation. Where the idea had first come from, none were certain, but once it took hold, it bloomed like a flower in sunlight. The Summation's power grew generation by generation, until its rule of Calliope was uncontested. Centuries passed and billions labored to further the Summation's goal. At last, they succeeded. On the day of the Emperor's ascension, in the High Hall of Indexes, a scribe wrote the final line of symbols to complete the formula, and in that instant, the Calliope fell silent. Then, an Imperial void ship arrived in Calliope, a standard decade later. It found a few starved people living amongst the dry corpses of the dead. None of the survivors could remember anything for more than a few seconds. Stranger still, the great archives were blank, every data store empty, and every page of parchment bare. The only mark remaining to tell of the algorithmic seed Ahriman planted and then harvested millennia later was a single image hovering in the lost memories of the survivors' blasted minds, the image of a figure in a horned helm wreathed in flame, stepping from a wound in the air. Ahriman had long sought the skulls of the Leopids, a dead hero of the Second Black Crusade, for reasons that remain in his own, still unknown to those all other. The skull, dipped in silver and engraved with 10,000 words of detestation, lay in the polar shrine city of the world of Dionysus. A conspiracy to obtain the skull by guile had already failed, so Ahriman turned to more direct means. Since the end of the scourging, countless billions have fought and died in the shadow of the Eye of Terror. For almost 8 Terran millennia, the remains of many of these honored dead lay on Dionysus. Heaps of charred bone and serene bodies of Imperial martyrs, and the polished skulls of Space Marines all came to the mausoleum world. On the surface of Dionysus, the plains of bones extended from shrine city to shrine city, and grew ever deeper with each passing year. The cities themselves were built from the skulls and bones of the most heroic dead. So sacred and revered was Dionysus that a dozen Space Marine chapters maintained honor guards and bastions on its surface. Star fortresses ringed its approaches, and millions of troops stood sentinel over the skulls of those who had died in the darkness of Abeyance. Across the reaches of space, Ahriman burned worlds and sent souls shrieking into the warp, as they murdered worlds spun into alignment with each other as they created their own arcane pattern in the stars with Dionysus at its heart. As the great design locked into place, Dionysus' sun was pulled from reality, leaving a howling wound in the sky of the mausoleum world. Blood and fire spread across the heavens. The bones of the dead howled the last thoughts of their lives, and rainbow fire crawled across the ossuary towers. Demons poured through the hole where had been what the sun was, tumbling into the mausoleum worlds like falling stars. The Imperial defenders screamed as the children of chaos ate their souls. Amidst the slaughter, Ahriman appeared, outlined in lightning, ringed by sorcerers and rubricae. Power rolled from the circle of sorcerers, and they strode through battle, killing the defenders and dissolving demons with arcane fire. Space Marine chapter honor guards came against them, but were reduced to ashes and silent screams with a mere gesture. Firebane, the last warlord-class titan of the Legio Officium, stored into war on its shrine. Its cry of its war horns echoed across the damned world, and its weapons burnt a path towards Ahriman's circle. Drawing together the power of his fellow sorcerers, Ahriman forced the war machine to its knees, before pulling the core of its plasma reactor through its carapace. At last, Ahriman held the skull of Lepidus in his hand, as the battle between men and demons raged around him. Raising the skull to his eyes, he found the one word he sought etched on the skull's surface. Letting the skull fall from his hand, he and his forces vanished, leaving the world of bones to the howls of demons and the cries of the dying. In his quest for forbidden knowledge of the Eldar's Black Library, Ahriman is known to have breached the Eldar webway twice, both times occurring during the 13th Black Crusade. In the first instance, Ahriman was able to get access to the Eldar webway using knowledge extracted from the captured Inquisitor Bronslaw, Savak. Savak had been the only human ever invited into the Eldar to be a guest of the hidden Eldar craft world that is the Black Library, but in reality, he had been used by the Eldar as bait and a foil for Ahriman. Ahriman subsequently entered the webway through a long-forgotten portal that was discovered by his minions on the world of Etiamun III, a planet bequeathed to the care of the Imperium by the Eldar of Craftworld Al-Ansar, before that Craftworld had been lost in the Eye of Terror millennia before. This intrusion was considered a major setback by the Eldar Farseers, who had failed to foresee it, and none other than Eldrad Orthran himself, the greatest of all Eldar Farseers, had to be summoned from Orthway to lead the Eldar defense against the breach. Ahriman was eventually repulsed, and the webway gate that he had used to gain entry was sealed, never to be opened again. The Secretive Order Psychana, which consists exclusively of Bloodraven's librarians, was also called in to help defeat the traitors, but they arrived too late, and they subsequently took over the protection of the Imperial Reclusium that housed that portal. A short time later, Ahriman's psychic and occult powers allowed him to foresee a rip in the webway, inadvertently caused by the Bloodraven's librarian, Rama, near the planet of Lorn 5, during the chapter's operations on that ice world. Accompanied by a warband of Thousand Sun sorcerers that he called the Prodigal Sons, Ahriman approached the planet under stealth. He used his sorcery and the aid of demons and the transdimensional rip caused by Rama to find a webway portal to Arcadia, the Eldar planet of law. The world was exclusive domain of Harlequins, and they contained a masterfully concealed Eldar settlement, including an extensive librarium, a repository of Eldar history and technology. Ahriman utilized a book that was considered a myth, the Tome of Carabinian, which he had taken from the Eldar Solitaire of the same name, to attempt to find one of the Arcadian webway portals leading directly to the Black Library. He additionally sought to steal an artifact known as the Sword of Lanthralak, a potent weapon used by the Eldar eons ago against the Catan during the War in Heaven, which was held by Arcadia's greatest Harlequin. Ahriman and the Prodigal Sons had also captured the Demon Fuge and former sister battle Ephriel Stern, who he intended to use against his rivals following his conquest of the Black Library. Despite summoning a Leviathan, a giant flying warp beast similar in size and shape to a manta ray, and inflicting horrendous casualties on both sides of the conflict, Ahriman was ejected from the webway, with his goal unattained. Following the end of the 13th Black Crusade, Ahriman's star is once again on the rise with the Thousand Sons demon Primarch Magnus the Red, mostly due to the great chaos caused by his battles against the Eldar within the webway, the prowess he displayed in capturing Inquisitor Savak, and the extraordinary knowledge and ability required to even come close to entering the fabled Black Library. It is rumored that if Ahriman ever gained entry into this library, he could use the information contained within it to become a new and powerful Chaos God within the Warp. Ahriman refuses to acknowledge either Tzeentch or Chaos itself as his master. Across the ensuing millennia, he has become a scourge of the Imperium, raiding ancient museums, librariums, scholaria, and reclusia, places of learning, religion, and contemplative thought. He seeks to acquire artifacts, data, or even persons he believes can lead him to master the way of the sorcerer. He fosters chaos cults on dozens of worlds at a time, providing the cult magi with sorcerous power until such a time that they have acquired some trinket or satisfied another of Ahriman's demands, before turning the wrath of his Thousand Sons upon them. The Terran millennia have passed in the realms beyond the Eye of Terror, and still Ahriman walks the path of exile towards the promise of a distant salvation. Perhaps Ahriman has already tried to undo the damage of the past, and failed, but as the light of the Imperium gutters, his steps take him ever closer to the answers that he has sought for so long. The shadow of secrets, lost since before humans ever stared up at the stars, lingers on the horizon in the elusive Black Library, calling Ahriman ever on, down the road into the future. Flames light that road, and the bones of the dead and the ashes of murdered worlds pave its course. None, except perhaps Zeech, who watches all and laughs the song of fate, knows what awaits Ahriman at the end of that road. But if he should reach its end, the universe will surely tremble. And now onto the abilities and war gear of Ahriman. Ahriman is a true master of sorcery and one of the most powerful psykers in the whole galaxy, his knowledge of the dark arts only rivaled by the greater demons of his patron. In addition to the multitude of chaos psychic powers he can call upon, he is armed with the Black Staff of Ahriman, an ornate force weapon which provides a potent focus for his psychic energy. He also carries an enchanted bolt pistol which fires powerful inferno bolts, similar to the weapons of the Rubric Marines. Ahriman's sorcerer's powers are apparent even in the cast of his skin. His facial features seem to blur and shift constantly, making it almost impossible to focus on anything other than his eyes, which appear as constantly burning with blue flame. Now before I end the video, this guy has some amazing quotes, so I'm going to be basically reciting them to you guys. Let me know which one's your favorite. If the path to salvation leads through the halls of purgatory, then so be it. The only good is knowledge, and the only evil is ignorance. Change is sometimes necessary, but I prefer order. It is more predictable. And what are the achievements of your fragile Imperium? It is a corpse rotting slowly from within while maggots writhe in its belly. It was built with the toil of heroes and giants, and now it is inhabited by frightened weaklings to whom the glories of those times are half-forgotten legends. I have forgotten nothing, and my wisdom has expanded far beyond mere mortal frailties. Knowledge is power, and with the key to the Black Library, I shall claim it all. We are the Red Sorcerers of Prospero, damned in the eyes of our fellows, and if this is how our story ends, in betrayal and bloodshed, no, you may find it nobler to suffer your fate, but I will take arms against it. Knowledge is power, but power is nothing without purpose. You may hold in your hand the power to remake all things, but if you do not know what you could change, then you hold nothing at all.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.